Om Hari Om. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinav Aditamastu Mavidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Well, good evening, everyone, and namaste. Welcome to our Tuesday evening reading and discussion of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Our beloved reader is Haima Naidu. She will tell us where we are in the book, and unless there's some comment, concern, or question that needs to be raised before we begin reading, is there anything from anyone? All right. Namaste, Daniel. So, Haima, please begin.
Sure, Brother Shankara. Good evening and namaste, everybody. We are on page 69 on PDF, and you need to figure out the book. And it's on the 4th paragraph of Gopalma. That's what we were talking about last week. And I will start at the 4th paragraph, which is she spent about 2 months. That's where I am. So let's get back there. She spent about 2 months in uninterrupted communion with God, the baby Gopala, never leaving her for a moment. Then the intensity of her vision was lessened. Had it not been, her body would have perished. The master spoke highly of her exalted spiritual condition and said that such vision of God was a rare thing for ordinary mortals. The fun-loving master one day confronted the critical Narendranath with this simple-minded woman. No two could have presented a more striking contrast. The master knew of Narendra's lofty contempt for all visions, and he asked the old lady to narrate her experiences to Narendra. With great hesitation, she told him her story. Now and then, she interrupted her maternal chatter to ask Narendra, "My son, I'm a poor, ignorant woman. I don't understand anything. You are so learned. Now tell me, if these visions of Gopala are true." As Narendra listened to the story, he was profoundly moved. He said, "Yes, mother, they are quite true." Behind his cynicism, Narendra too possessed a heart full of love and tenderness. That's the end about Gopalma.
And I think it's so sweet that it ends on this note of her persuading Narendra that what she experienced was an absolute truth. I think it's very sweet that behind Narendra's cynicism, there was this great heart. So it's a sweet note to end Gopalma on. It doesn't say so, but Gopalma became one of Mother Sri Sharda Devi's most intimate companions after Sri Ramakrishna left the body. Gopalma and some other women, 3 or 4 other women, became her handmaidens, her very close companions. Gopalma was one of them. perhaps the most important. So, any other comments or concerns or questions? Okay, dear, read on.
Next subchapter is the March of Events. In 1882, Friday was dismissed from service in the Kali temple for an act of indiscretion and was ordered by the authorities never again to enter the garden. In a way, the hand of the Divine Mother may be seen even in this. Having taken care of Sri Ramakrishna during the stormy days of his spiritual discipline, Friday had come naturally to consider himself the sole guardian of his uncle. None could approach the master without his knowledge, and he would be extremely jealous of Sri Ramakrishna paid attention to anyone else. Friday's removal made it possible for the real devotees of the master to approach him freely and live with him in the temple garden. During the weekends, the householders, enjoying a respite from their office duties, visited the master. The meetings on Sunday afternoons were of the nature of little festivals. Refreshments were often served. Professional musicians now and then sang devotional songs. The master and the devotees sang and danced, Sri Ramakrishna frequently going into ecstatic moods. The happy memory of such a Sunday would linger long in the minds of the devotees. Those whom the master wanted for special instruction, he would ask to visit him on Tuesdays and Saturdays. These days were particularly auspicious for the worship of Kali. The young disciples destined to be monks, Sri Ramakrishna invited on weekdays when the householders were not present. The training of the householders and the future monks had to proceed along entirely different lines. Since M generally visited the master on weekends, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna does not contain much mention of the future monastic disciples. Finally, there was a handful of fortunate disciples, householders as well as youngsters, who were privileged to spend nights with the master in his room. They would see him get up early in the morning and walk up and down the room, singing in his sweet voice and tenderly communing with the mother. That's about the march of events. Next subheading is injury to the master's arm.
Hang on just a moment.
Sure, Brother Shankara.
This gathering of the householders on weekends, the gathering of the young men who were to become monastics on the weekdays. The master trained them very differently, very differently. Each person receiving both householders and these young men who were to become the monks of the order, receiving intense personal instruction. The master had only about 100 disciples, and they were a very select group. So the march of events is a strong subtitle, because it indeed was a march. There was a great deal of hard work done among those people. So now we're on to the injury to the master's arm, which is a very interesting incident. Please go ahead, dear.
Okay. Injury to the master's arm. One day in January 1884, the master was going toward the pine grove when he went into trance. He was alone. There was no one to support him or guide his footsteps. He fell to the ground and dislocated a bone in his left arm. This accident had a significant influence on his mind, the natural inclination of which was to soar above the consciousness of the body. The acute pain in the arm forced his mind to dwell on the body and on the world outside. But he saw even in this a divine purpose. For with his mind compelled to dwell on the physical plane, he realized more than ever that he was an instrument in the hand of the Divine Mother, who had a mission to fulfill through his human body and mind. He also distinctly found that in the phenomenal world, God manifests himself in an inscrutable way through diverse human beings, both good and evil. Thus, he would speak of God in the guise of the wicked, God in the guise of the pious, God in the guise of the hypocrite, God in the guise of the lewd. He began to take a special delight in watching the divine play in the relative world. Sometimes the sweet human relationship with God would appear to him more appealing than the all-effacing knowledge of Brahman. Many a time he would pray.
Repeat that sentence
Sure.
again. This is a very, very important point, because one of the things that happened as a result of his injury to his arm is he developed more empathy for the sufferings of ordinary human beings. And it's reflected in this phrase that I was just about to repeat.
Sure. He also distinctly found that in the phenomenal world, God manifests himself in an inscrutable way through diverse human beings, both good and evil. Thus, he would speak of God in the guise of the wicked, God in the guise of the pious, God in the guise of the hypocrite, God in the guise of the lewd. He began to take a special delight in watching the divine play in the relative world.
This last sentence, he began to take a special delight in the play of the divine in the relative world, which before he would soar away from this. And now he was focused on it. And it really enabled some interactions, as we'll see later on.
Sometimes, you want me to move? Sometimes the sweet human relationship with God would appear to him more appealing than the all-effacing knowledge of Brahman. Many a time he would pray, Mother, don't make me unconscious through the knowledge of Brahman. Don't give me Brahmajnana, Mother. I'm not your child and naturally timid. Oh, am I not your child and naturally timid?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah. Am I not your child and naturally timid? I must have my mother. A million salutations to the knowledge of Brahman. Give it to those who want it. Again he prayed, Oh Mother, let me remain in contact with men. Don't make me a dried up ascetic. I want to enjoy your sport in the world. He was able to taste this very rich divine experience and enjoy the love of God and the company of his devotees because his mind, on account of the injury to his arm, was forced to come down to the consciousness of the body. Again,
now, of course, that has not left.
Mhm.
That remained with Sri Ramakrishna. So we must never feel shy about uh, being aware of and remarking on our sufferings, because the master will empathize. Some people feel shy about this. They feel, oh, I need to keep my mind tuned higher than that. I must never complain. Well, there's a difference between remarking in a way on something and grumbling. Vivekananda says, don't grumble, but he himself complained. So it's perfectly all right for us to acknowledge to ourselves and to the divine, to Sri Ramakrishna, and whatever else is our chosen ideal, the mother and so on, about these things. Any comments or questions from anyone?
Well, it reminds me of like what the Buddha said about the first and the second arrow. He never said the first arrow wasn't going to hurt.
No. It was going to hurt.
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear.
So when we are hurting somewhere in the body, I think acknowledging it is more truthful than hiding it.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes, I guess for whatever reason, perhaps, at least speaking for myself, when I get tired of listening to some suggestion or the other which I'm not ready for, then I might just say, no, I'm fine, everything is. But that's actually a way of subverting that unwanted advice, but not necessarily to hide it. But then sometimes it's good to just say, yes, it's hurting, but I'm working through it.
Yes, and when we're hurting, how can we wish to deny it? We're not until we're established in samadhi. We're not free from suffering. So, and being established in samadhi is a very, very long road from here for most of us. So, yes, we can be perfectly frank with ourselves and with the other people around us, and with the divine about our physical ailments. The Master acknowledged that he suffered in this way so that he would have this understanding. It's a glory. It's one of the points of contact with the divine presence that allows us to be completely free and sweet with the Master and with Mother.
Thank you.
Anything else from anyone? Thank you, Swami.
I think the body in pain is a great learning tool, because it's like you have a constant like laboratory to experiment.
Well, you should know, dear. You described to me the other day when you visited how much suffering you've gone through.
Well, actually, it wasn't the pain. It was that I really didn't want to be out of the loop and be out away from the center and everybody, really, is what I was trying to tell you. It's right. Not that, I've been in pain a long time, and it's just, it's kind of like, when I used to be in the glass business and I had this girl and she scheduled every ticket as first stop. And I tried to explain to her, when every ticket is the first stop, then you might as well not put it on any ticket because It's all the same. And so it's kind of, I just look at it like that. Just, I don't identify with it, you know?
Very good. Very good. Yes. We must not identify with these things. We can acknowledge them, but we must not identify with them. Identification turns into attachment. Attachment turns into entrapment.
You know what? My first grand sponsor had a phrase that always stuck with me, but, you know, he called it unnecessary roughness. You know, like the Buddha said, you know, the first area you get hit, it's going to hurt. But the second era is the suffering you do to yourself and your mind, you know, thinking all, you know, where the mind's writing stories and creating beliefs and pain and all kind of stuff that it doesn't, you don't have to listen to those stories.
No, you do not. But you must acknowledge with great sincerity that it is the nature of the mind to write them. You just don't have to believe them. But you must acknowledge them and not try to pretend, as Swayam was saying, that this doesn't exist, that isn't the case. That's just hypocritical. Anything else from anyone? This is wonderful. Okay, thank you, dear. Please read on.
He was able to taste this very rich divine experience and enjoy the love of God and the company of his devotees because his mind, on account of the injury to his arm, was forced to come down to the consciousness of the body. Again, he would make fun of people who proclaimed him as a divine incarnation by pointing to his broken arm. He would say, "Have you ever heard of God breaking his arm?" It took the arm about 5 months to heal. That's the end of that particular subchapter, which is injury to the master's arm.
Yeah, and there were a number of physicians who came, but of course there were no x-rays in those days. So they couldn't exactly know what it was that had happened. So they kept trying to treat it. And in some cases, they actually made it worse because they were working with a dislocated bone. These days, with x-rays, it would have been, it would have been fixed relatively quickly. It would have been wrapped, immobilized, whatever. And it would have been fixed relatively quickly. But of course, that was not the Divine Mother's intention. The Divine Mother's intention was, as it was said so clearly, to bring the Master's attention to the body on the relative plane.
You know, I think to us as not being the avatar, that, you know, later on in the book where I believe, was it Dr. Sarka that is talking to him and, you know, he's suffering from the cancer, but he realizes his mind is still in bliss, you know, and he realizes the rascal, you know, it's like realizing, you know, what I call realizing the rascal is that's a very important story.
Oh, yes. Well, Doctor, the reason the gospel ends with the stories of Dr. Sarkar is no accident. The stories of you pointed directly to this, what seems to us so paradoxical, that the Master can be dying of throat cancer, not just throat cancer. By that point, it had metastasized, and he was just skin and bones. And so here he was, you know, in one sense, an agonizing pain. And that was a fact. But on the other hand, his mind could soar above that. And it just confounded Dr. Sarkar. Thanks for bringing that up, Bhagavatas. We'll get there. It's a long way to Dr. Sarkar from where we are, but we'll get there. All right, dear, please read on.
So, Brother Shankar, I just wanted to add that it's all the more endearing that he went through so much suffering to liberate us, because it's very difficult to be dependent on others for every little needs, and especially when he had a tool, like he could raise his mind and be gone, but he chose to come back and live with all the pain. He chose to live so that he could be refuge to so many of us.
How great was thy sacrifice, freely choosing thy birth in this prison, our iron age, to unchain us and set us free. Yes, indeed, dear. Yes. So much suffering. How great was thy sacrifice.
You know, Father Keating, there's a video where he's talking about Easter and the crucifixion of Christ, and that very moment where all the divinity more or less is stripped away from Christ, and he's human, you know, for in that instant, and just the suffering of it, you know, the way he puts it is remarkable. If anybody, you know, wants to go and listen to that.
The 13th station of the cross, yes. The 13th station of the cross, where Christ cries out. Heartrending, absolutely heartrending. Thank you, Bhagavatas. Anything else? All right, dear, please read on.
Next subheading is beginning of his illness. In April 1885, the master's throat became inflamed. Prolonged conversation or absorption in samadhi, making the blood flow into the throat, would aggravate the pain. Yet, when the annual Vaishnava festival was celebrated at Panihati, Sri Ramakrishna attended it against the doctor's advice. With a group of disciples, he spent himself in music, dance, and ecstasy. The illness took a turn for the worse and was diagnosed as clergyman's sore throat. The patient was cautioned against conversation and ecstasies. Though he followed the physician's directions regarding medicine and diet, he could neither control his trances nor withhold from seekers the solace of his advice. Sometimes, like a sucky child, he would complain to the mother about the crowds who gave him no rest day or night. He was overheard to say to her, "Why do you bring here all these worthless people who are like milk diluted with 5 times its own quantity of water? My eyes are almost destroyed with blowing the fire to dry up the water.
Yeah.
My health is gone. It's beyond my strength. Do it yourself if you want it done." This, pointing to his own body, "this is but a perforated drum, and if you go on beating it day in and day out, how long will it last?" But his large heart never turned anyone away. He said, "Let me be condemned to be born over and over again, even in the form of a dog, if I can be of help to a single soul." And he bore.
We'll hear that again, but
Yeah.
let's hear it in the context that the master meant every word of this quite literally. So please read that again.
Sure. But
Let's hear that in that spirit.
But his large heart never turned anyone away. He said, "Let me be condemned to be born over and over again, even in the form of a dog, if I can be of help to a single soul.
Now, we have to contextually, a dog in Bengal at that time was regarded as a very inferior creature. We now see dogs as our companions, and they're loving companions, and so on. But at that time in Bengal, dogs ate from the leavings of the temple, and were scruffy and uncared for. So when the master said, "Let me be born again and again, even as a dog, if as a dog I can be of service to even one person," what does this mean to us? Okay, dear, please read on.
And he bore the pain, singing cheerfully, "Let the body be preoccupied with illness, but, O mind, dwell forever in God's bliss." One night he had a hemorrhage of the throat. The doctor now diagnosed the illness as cancer. Narendra was the first to break this heart-rending news to the disciples. Within 3 days, the master was removed to Calcutta for better treatment. At Balaram's house, he remained a week until a suitable place could be found at Champakur in the northern section of Calcutta. During this week, he dedicated himself practically without respite to the instruction of those beloved devotees who had been unable to visit him oftener at Dakshineshwar. Discourses incessantly flowed from his tongue, and he often went into samadhi. Dr. Mahendra Sarkar, the celebrated homeopath of Calcutta, was invited to undertake his treatment. Next subheading, Champakur. In the beginning of September 1885, Sri Ramakrishna was moved to Champakur. Here, Narendra organized the young disciples to attend the master day and night. At first, they concealed the master's illness from their guardians, but when it became more serious, they remained with him almost constantly, sweeping aside the objections of their relatives and devoting themselves wholeheartedly to the nursing of their beloved Guru. These young men, under the watchful eyes of the master and the leadership of Narendra, became the Antaranga Bhaktas, the devotees of Sri Ramakrishna's inner circle. They were privileged to witness many manifestations of the master's divine powers. Narendra received instructions regarding the propagation of his message after his death. The Holy Mother, so Sharada Devi, had come to be affectionately known by Sri Ramakrishna's devotees, was brought from Dakshineshwar to look after the general cooking and to prepare the special diet of the patient. The dwelling space being extremely limited, she had to adapt herself to cramped conditions. At 3 o'clock in the morning, she would finish her bath in the Ganges and then enter a small covered place on the roof where she spent the whole day cooking and praying. After 11 at night, when the visitors went away, she would come down to her small bedroom on the first floor to enjoy a few hours' sleep. Thus, she spent 3 months working hard, sleeping little, and praying constantly for the master's recovery. At Champakur, the devotees led an intense life. Their attendance on the master was in itself a form of spiritual discipline. His mind was constantly soaring to an exalted plane of consciousness. Now and then, they would catch the contagion of his spiritual fervor. They sought to divine the meaning of this illness of the Master, whom most of them had accepted as an incarnation of God. One group, headed by Girish, with his robust optimism and great power of imagination, believed that the illness was a mere pretext to serve a deeper purpose. The Master had willed his illness in order to bring the devotees together and promote solidarity among them. As soon as this purpose was served, he would himself get rid of the disease. A second group thought that the Divine Mother, in whose hand the Master was an instrument, had brought about this illness to serve her own mysterious ends. But the young rationalists, led by Narendra, refused to ascribe a supernatural cause to a natural phenomenon. They believed that the Master's body, a maternal thing, was subject, like all other material things, to physical laws.
And this, of course, is the correct view. This is the correct view, that the Master's body was, when he took human form, as Holy Mother said, he became liable to all of what happens to human forms. And so exactly what Narendra said, which I'll ask Ima to read again.
Sure, I will, Brother Shankara.
Was the accurate reading.
Let me see. The Master had willed his illness in order to bring the devotees together and promote solidarity among them. As soon as this purpose was served, he would himself get rid of the disease. A second group thought that the Divine Mother...
No, what Narendra said.
Oh, you want me to...
Forget about what these other people said.
Don't need all this.
They were wrong.
Okay, but the young rationalists led by Narendra, that's where you want me to read, right?
Yes.
But the young rationalists led by Narendra refused to ascribe a supernatural cause to a natural phenomenon. They believed that the Master's body, a material thing, was subject, like all other material things, to physical laws. Growth, development, decay, and death were laws of nature to which the Master's body could not but respond. But though holding differing views, they all believed that it was to him alone that they must look for the attainment of their spiritual goal.
Yes.
In spite of the physician's efforts and the prayers and nursing of the devotees, the illness rapidly progressed. The pain sometimes appeared to be unbearable. The Master lived only on liquid food, and his frail body was becoming a mere skeleton. Yet his face always radiated joy, and he continued to welcome the visitors pouring in to receive his blessing. When certain zealous devotees tried to keep the visitors away, they were told by Girish, "You cannot succeed in it. He has been born for this very purpose, to sacrifice himself for the redemption of others." The more the body was devastated by illness, the more it became the habitation of the Divine Spirit. Through its transparency, the gods and goddesses began to shine with ever-increasing luminosity. On the day of the Kali Puja, the devotees clearly saw in him the manifestation of the Divine Mother. It was noticed at this time that some of the devotees were making an unbridled display of their emotions. A number of them, particularly among the householders, began to cultivate, though at first unconsciously, the art of shedding tears, shaking the body, contorting the face, and going into trances, attempting thereby to imitate the master. They began openly to declare Sri Ramakrishna a divine incarnation and to regard themselves as his chosen people who could neglect religious disciplines with impunity. Narendra's penetrating eye soon sized up the situation. He found out that some of these external manifestations were being carefully practiced at home, while some were the outcome of malnutrition, mental weakness, or nervous debility. He mercilessly exposed the devotees who were pretending to have visions and asked all to develop a healthy religious spirit. Narendra sang inspiring songs for the younger devotees, read with them the Imitation of Christ and the Gita, and held before them the positive ideals of spirituality. Next subheading.
Let's
Any comments?
note that Narendra's mission had already begun. What was he bringing to their attention? The necessity for spiritual disciplines and these two books that were for the rest of his life, the two books on which he relied, the Gita and the Imitation of Christ. It's so interesting that his mission, even before the master left the body, Narendra's mission had begun to redirect people's attention away from pretense and to sincerity and earnest spiritual disciplines and growth. Phenomenal. Anything from anyone else?
Swami Dhyana Yogananda said over the weekend something that really stuck with me, and he said that devotion equals discipline, and that there's a hard correlation between the two, and it's like made me really realize that devotion must turn into discipline.
It must manifest as discipline, yes. Otherwise, it's just pretense.
Mm-hmm.
Very well said, both by Dhyana Yogananda and for you to recall it in this context. Very well said. It is devotion, is simply sentimentality if it doesn't turn into the determination of spiritual discipline. Thank you. Anything else from anyone? Okay, dear, please read on.
Next subheading, last days at Kasipur. When Sri Ramakrishna's illness showed signs of aggravation, the devotees, following the advice of Dr. Sarkar, rented a spacious garden house at Kasipur in the northern suburbs of Calcutta. The master was removed to this place on December 11th, 1885. It was at Kasipur that the curtain fell on the varied activities of the master's life on the physical plane. His soul lingered in the body 8 months more. It was the period of his great passion, a constant crucifixion of the body, and the triumphant revelation of the soul.
Now, there's no accident in the use of these words, passion and crucifixion. The passion of Christ and the crucifixion of Christ. This is what's going on with Sri Ramakrishna, though it doesn't involve crowds of people assassinating him. It does have to do with this unbearable suffering and a kind of crucifixion. Please go ahead, dear.
Sure. Here one sees the humanity and divinity of the Master passing and repassing across a thin borderline. Every minute of those 8 months was suffused with touching tenderness of heart and breathtaking elevation of spirit. Every word he uttered was full of pathos and sublimity. It took the group only a few days to become adjusted to the new environment. The Holy Mother, assisted by Sri Ramakrishna's niece, Lakshmi Devi, and a few women devotees, took charge of the cooking for the Master and his attendants. Surendra willingly bore the major portion of the expenses, other householders contributing according to their means. 12 disciples were constant attendants of the Master. They are Narendra, Rakham, Baburam, Niranjan, Jogin, Latu, Tarak, the elder Gopal, Kali, Sashi, Sharath, and the younger Gopal, Sharada, Harish, Hari, Gangadhar, and Tulsi visited the Master from time to time and practiced sadhana at home. Narendra, preparing for his law examination, brought his books to the garden house in order to continue his studies during the infrequent spare moments. He encouraged his brother disciples to intensify their meditation, scriptural studies, and other spiritual disciplines. They all forgot their relatives and their worldly duties. Among the attendants, Sashi was the embodiment of service. He did not practice meditation, japa, or any of the other disciplines followed by his brother devotees. He was convinced that service to the Guru was the only religion for him. He forgot food and rest and was ever ready at the Master's bedside. Pandit Shashadhar one day suggested to the Master that the latter could remove the illness by concentrating his mind on the throat, the scriptures having declared that yogis had power to cure themselves in that way. The Master rebuked the Pandit. For a scholar like you to make such a proposal, he said, how can I withdraw the mind from the lotus feet of God and turn it to this worthless cage of flesh and blood? For our sake at least, begged Narendra and the other disciples. But, replied Sri Ramakrishna, do you think I enjoy this suffering? I wish to recover, but that depends on the mother. A few hours later, the Master said to Narendra, I said to her, Mother, I cannot swallow food because of my pain. Make it possible for me to eat a little. She pointed you all out to me and said, what? You are eating enough through all these mouths. Isn't that so? I was ashamed and could not utter another word. This dashed all the hopes of the devotees for the Master's recovery. I shall make the whole thing public before I go, the Master had said some time before. On January 1st, 1886, he felt better and came down to the garden for a little stroll. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Some 30 lay disciples were in the hall or sitting about under the trees. Sri Ramakrishna said to Girish, "Well, Girish, what have you seen in me that you proclaim me before everybody as an incarnation of God?" Girish was not the man to be taken by surprise. He knelt before the master and said with folded hands, "What can an insignificant person like myself say about the one whose glory even sages like Vyasa and Valmiki could not adequately measure?" The master was profoundly moved. He said, "What more shall I say? I bless you all. Be illumined."
Now, Vyasa and Valmiki. Yes. Valmiki is the one who wrote the Ramayana. And Vyasa is the one who wrote many different things about the incarnations of God, especially about Krishna. So this is what Girish is pointing to. Those who tried to say something, and of course, they fell short of the mark of adequately describing them, of course. But this is what he means when he says, "What can an insignificant person like myself say when such as Vyasa and Valmiki have made their efforts?" But the master doesn't see this as slighting. He sees it as a way of remarking on his greatness, and says, "What else can I say? Be you all illumined." So read that again, please, dear.
Oh, Brother Shankara. Girish was not the man to be taken by surprise. He knelt before the master and said with folded hands, "What can an insignificant person like myself say about the one whose glory even sages like Vyasa and Valmiki could not adequately measure?" The master was profoundly moved. He said, "What more shall I say? I bless you all. Be illumined." He fell into a spiritual mood. Hearing these words, the devotees, one and all, became overwhelmed with emotion. They rushed to him and fell at his feet. He touched them all, and each received an appropriate benediction. Each of them, at the touch of the master, experienced ineffable bliss. Some laughed, some wept, some sat down to meditate, some began to pray. Some saw light, some had visions of their chosen ideals, and some felt within their bodies the rush of spiritual power. Narendra, consumed with a terrific fervor for realization, complained to the master that all the others had attained peace and that he alone was dissatisfied. The master asked what he wanted. Narendra begged for samadhi so that he might altogether forget the world for 3 or 4 days at a time. "You are a fool," the master rebuked him. "There is a state even higher than that. Isn't it you who sing, 'All that exists art thou'? First of all, settle your family affairs and then come to me. You will experience a state even higher than samadhi." The master did not hide the fact that he wished to make Narendra his spiritual heir. Narendra was to continue the work after Sri Ramakrishna's passing. Sri Ramakrishna said to him, "I leave these young men in your charge. See that they develop their spirituality and do not return home." One day he asked the boys, in preparation for a monastic life, to beg their food from door to door without thought of caste. They hailed the master's order and went out with begging bowls. A few days later, he gave the ochre cloth of the sannyasi to each of them, including Girish, who was now second to none in his spirit of renunciation. Thus, the Master himself laid the foundation of the future Ramakrishna order of monks. Sri Ramakrishna was sinking day by day. His diet was reduced to a minimum, and he found it almost impossible to swallow. He whispered to M, "I am bearing all this cheerfully, for otherwise you would be weeping. If you all say that it's better that the body should go rather than suffer this torture, I'm willing." The next morning, he said to his depressed disciples, seated near the bed, "Do you know what I see? I see that God alone has become everything. Men and animals are only frameworks covered with skin, and it is He who is moving through their heads and limbs. I see that it is God Himself who has become the block, the executioner, and the victim for the sacrifice." He fainted with emotion. Regaining partial consciousness, he said, "Now I have no pain. I'm very well." Looking at Latu, he said, "There sits Latu, resting his head on the palm of his hand. To me, it is Lord who is seated in that posture." Brother Shankara, it's almost close to 3 minutes more. Would you like to comment on this? We can close here and start next week. We only have 3 minutes left. Would you like?
Thank you for bringing that up.
Sure.
I think we'll read this again
Okay.
next week when we start,
Sure.
because this is the closing chapter.
Okay.
I mean, we'll read from...
I'll start from a few paragraphs before this, or
Yeah.
from of this.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be good.
So,
Last.
thanks for bringing my attention to the time.
Sure, brother.
So we'll close as we always do. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga, Durga, Durga. May we all be safe. May we all be healthy. May we all be cheerful. May we all have peace of mind. And may we all go forward, secure in the knowledge that we are in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being as our Mother and Father. May we all be well and in bright spirits. And so until tomorrow evening, when we'll take up the book Realizing God, thank you all for being with us, and thank you for being the people who are part of this. It's inexpressibly wonderful.
Thank you.
Any final thought from anyone? All right, dears. Good night.